Welcome to the Bitcoin Beat with Shaun and Jeff. As some of you may already know, I'm Shaun. This is where Jeff would be if he was with us today. He had some things come up, so we weren't able to connect for this week's episode, but I'm sure he'll be back next week. And we got a couple things coming up as far as plans for interviews, so stay tuned on that. But for this week, you got me, and I'm excited because Bitcoin's difficulty adjustment is crashing. Well, what does that really mean? I'll dig into that a little bit, talk a little bit about that, why it may matter to you. But first, I want to kind of cover some things that Jeff has normally updated us on every week. And I find this interesting every week. I think you guys do too, based on the feedback we get. And that's this ratio of Bitcoin to gold. Specifically when the tensions and conflict kicked off in Iran back on February 24th. Now, granted, there were a couple months leading up to that where the escalation seemed pretty clear something was about to happen. But from that point, when actual uncertainty and geopolitical risk started, we started watching a divergence where Bitcoin kept climbing and gold kept dropping. Well, some things have changed since then with Bitcoin's recent sell-off and a lot of these tech plays where we're talking about like SpaceX and NVIDIA and other things coming up for IPOs. But really what's interesting is Bitcoin is still outperforming gold. But Bitcoin's roughly flat now from the start when we go all the way back to February 28th. Bitcoin and gold have been coming up a little bit, but not nearly as much as like the stock market and especially the NASDAQ, the QQQ, which is more of the technical space. That's where you have all the big techs. And it's interesting because when you look at his chart down here, you can see the divergence happen right when Bitcoin starts plummeting, where it went from some of its highs in February down to like 60 and just more recently like 58,000. And you also see what gold has done, but everything's kind of popping up recently. So we're going to start seeing, I think, a little bit more movement in Bitcoin. At least that's what's been happening so far. And back when there was really turmoil going on, we'll see if the conflict gets resolved or not. One thing that's somewhat interesting when you think about the SpaceX IPO, and the money and the liquidity that's probably going to get drained to move into that doesn't necessarily mean that SpaceX will skyrocket and go exponential, although it has been going up really high. One of the interesting things is you would expect to see liquidity from all different types of markets, not just gold and silver and Bitcoin and other crypto, but even stocks. You would start to see liquidity being pulled out. We haven't seen it in the first day and a half of trading so far, but you start thinking that maybe some Tesla stock would get sold off, or my theory is NVIDIA, because NVIDIA was really the only direct pure play of AI, because they were the pickaxes, the shovels of the gold rush. They were providing all the chips that everybody wants, whether it's in Bitcoin, AI, or compute in general. Everybody wants the top tier chips, and they are the manufacturer of those. That will change over time and has shown indications of changing. But for now, that's where everybody was piling into that really want these groundbreaking AI plays. And now we have SpaceX Live, which if you really dig into the technicals of the SpaceX IPO, more than half of it is really tied to the future possibility and estimates coming to the revenue from the AI, the XAI merger of SpaceX. And then later this year, we have two more companies also going to be valued at over $1 trillion. They're going to IPO as well. Anthropic and OpenAI. So it's definitely something to watch. This is something that I'll be very interested to see when Jeff updates the chart and the stats here. So if you don't already follow him so you can get these updates when they come out. And then that way you can get a good idea of what's happening when it comes to that. So what's really happening with Bitcoin? Is it crashing? I'll tell you, I've just started mining for the first time, and I'll break into a little bit of details on why that's important to me and why I don't recommend mining, but also at the same time do recommend it. So I know that's a little nuanced, and people that follow me know what I'm talking about. But I want to show a chart here. Let's see if I can zoom in on that. And this shows the recent drop in difficulty adjustment for Bitcoin. And I'll talk about what that is. But the important thing here is you can see it's the 11th highest difficulty change to the downside that we've ever seen in Bitcoin's history. Number 10 was earlier this year, back in February as well, when things really started peaking and then dropping off. But before that, I mean, there's I think 2 or 3 that were in the 20s, 20, 21, and a few down below that were in 26, 25, like down here by the 2018 mark. It's not common to see these kind of wild swings, and we had a pretty big one just here this last week. Now, what is the difficulty adjustment when it comes to talking about Bitcoin? Well, when you're talking about mining, you're basically guessing to try to confirm a new block. And that guessing has a lot of math, or technically you're solving problems on math. And without getting too technical, what happens is the protocol is designed to keep up with progress in technology. So back years ago, take any time prior to today, some of the top end mining equipment could guess X number of times to try to confirm a block. And then a year later, it can do more for less power. The efficiency is better, so you can buy new equipment and continually goes up. And if you did not adjust for that, all 21 million Bitcoin would have been already mined a decade ago, probably even a little bit earlier than that. Because what happens is the protocol wants to try to keep blocks confirming every 10 minutes. But if you start getting into a time frame where it takes 8 minutes, 7 minutes, and now we're getting through that 2 weeks of block period and it ends up only being in 10 days, which, keep in mind, the technical number is actually every 2016 blocks, this difficulty adjustment adjusts to make it either easier or harder to guess the result or solution for that next block. So you don't want that to happen on a too short a basis. But let's say each block starts taking an hour, 2 hours long. Well, you don't want to necessarily have to wait to adjust that for a month down the road or a year down the road. So generally, if you're able to keep it at every 10 minutes, roughly every 2 weeks, you're going to get that adjustment, whether it goes up or down. And usually those movements aren't very big. Well, why is this big? Why is this a massive drop? And I think a lot of it digs into what we were just talking about when it comes to some of the things happening in these legacy financial markets for stocks. You have AI, which is like the biggest sector in the market, and the entire market's running hot right now too. Now you have SpaceX, like one of the hottest stocks in the hottest sector, in the hottest market. Everybody wants to get a piece of that. But even before that, we've seen like Bitcoin miners who maybe aren't altruistic. They're not necessarily pro Bitcoin, they're pro money. They have quarterly earnings they have to hit, stockholders, shareholders, stakeholders that they have to please. A lot of these miners like Riot and Marathon and others have been jumping into the AI space. And if we're honest as Bitcoiners, their product is not necessarily Bitcoin. Their product is infrastructure. They can host machines, they can cool them, they have space and warehouses for them. But more importantly, they generally have contracts or locations where power is cheapest. And that converts right over to AI compute, whether it's computer inference, learning. And so it's easy for them to transition. And if we're honest too, it's kind of easy to transition back and forth between the two. And they've been signaling that, especially Marathon. They've been signaling that for a couple of years on how they could kind of mix and blend those two. So I think we're seeing a lot of that. So when you have a lot of miners come off the network, because it's, with the price being as low as it is, and the hash rate difficulty being as high as it is, you have to expend more energy to get less Bitcoin, so the numbers aren't as profitable. And if you're a short-term thinker, as all these companies are required to be, well, that hurts. So they do a couple things. They either transition out of Bitcoin or they just turn the miners off. And then it becomes easier to confirm blocks when the difficulty adjustment changes. So you have less miners trying to complete blocks at this high rate, which is difficult. And then the difficulty has to adjust itself. And that's really what we saw this week, a 10% drop in that difficulty adjustment. So what does that mean for people like you and me, people that are solo miners, which I'm just new to solo mining? Now, I'll be honest, every time I've looked at it, from when I was early in Bitcoin and then when I got serious about Bitcoin, which, if we're honest, that's about 2020 is when I got serious about it and really started studying Bitcoin and understanding what it was. Mining had always seemed, for different reasons, to bring me to the same conclusion. And it's not worth it. From a financial standpoint, it's not worth it to mine at home. And I still think that's true, but why should you do it? So there's all these different theories and reasons. And if you watched our interview with Duncan, we talked about some of those reasons. When you're securing the network, you're decentralizing the mining, you're taking that lottery chance and you're benefiting from it. And there's also the argument, which although makes sense, yeah, let's say you're mining at home right now, and even if you have a somewhat efficient miner and decent power draw and decent hash rate, whatever the math works out to, you're getting X number of sats a day because you joined a pool. Well, odds are those sats are worth less in dollar terms than than the energy it took to mine those. And that's not even factoring in the device, having to buy and purchase a miner. And while that's true to say in the future, those sats will be worth more than you pay for energy at that price. 100% true, absolutely accurate. But so is just using that money instead of buying the miner, paying for the electricity, mining those sats and waiting for them to get more valuable. You could have just used that cash, that dollars, that fiat, and just bought the Bitcoin right then. And you would have bought more Bitcoin than you would have mined. 100% true too. So I just started, I'm playing around, joined a couple pools, did some solo mining, and it's fun. I'm not going to make any amount of money to make up for the power I'm putting into it, unless I somehow hit the lottery, which that's not a plan. But if you do, you get 3.125 Bitcoin plus fees, and that's quite a bit, especially for a solo miner. And solo miner do hit blocks. I think, what was 2025, was it 35 blocks were mined from solo miners? I'll have to double check that number. So that sounds like a lot, but it's not when you consider how many blocks are confirmed, when they're generally every 10 minutes throughout the whole year, and 35 were solo miners. It's possible. It's just not something to invest in. But I run it because it's exciting. It's fun. And speaking of fun, take a look at, first of all, I want to show you this chart here that Bitcoin News put up. This is where the hash rate is right now after this massive drop, right? It peaked up here around October when, guess what? Bitcoin price on number go up technology was its highest, like around 120, 125, and then it started to tail off, had a little bit of a rebound. But I think a lot of this is price. A lot of this is the AI narrative. There's a whole bunch of different factors that go into this. And it's interesting. And people like you and me can join pleb pools. That's what I did this weekend. I think a friend in our SoCo group up in Scottsdale might run this group. I should ask her. I know she posts about it a lot. But this is basically a pool. And instead of being in a massive pool where you're with, hundreds of thousands of other people, some with massive equipment, and you're trying to get a few sats a day from it where they split it up between all users. This is just plebs joining. A lot of solo miners. You can also buy some rented hash rate on it. Take a look at the post, look at the website. It's really, really interesting. So this Saturday, we were in a group, and it was 117 people, which I think might have been a record for this group, where the goal is to try to get to 1,000. That's eventually what they're going to hit. And they'll hit that someday. Every week, there's more people that are going to join. If you get a second miner, you can get a more hash rate on there. You can rent more, buy a little bit more for that particular time frame. But what's interesting is they postponed the start of this particular block party a little bit later than normal. They were planning it for a certain time on Saturday. They waited like 5 or 6 hours or 8 hours, or a little bit longer. And they waited for that difficulty adjustment to actually kick in. Because remember, every 2016 blocks, that's when it'll readjust. So they kind of waited it out to try to increase their odds. So when you see that hash rate drop, those of us that are running solo miners that already have a very minuscule chance to hit a block now have a slightly higher chance, because our hash rate is basically worth more on a mining system, on a mining thought process. And so anyway, take a look at this. I'll toss the link down below if you're interested in this. If you have a home solo miner, all you need to do to be a part of this is during that window on Saturdays when we all try to mine together in a pool, is point your hash rate, point your the address to this particular address, and you get paid out through there if we do hit a block. So check that out. I think that's interesting. They're like I said, they're trying to hit 1,000. What were they at? Yeah, so we had 117 that time. Looks like it's their 26th week of doing it. And if you want to join us on the 27th, trying to get Jeff set up and see if he can jump in with us too. But go ahead and mine with us. That'll be an exciting time if you want to mine some Bitcoin with a bunch of plebs like us. So that's the difficulty adjustment and how it works on Bitcoin. It's actually pretty genius. Technology proves the future, because if there's some ability to start mining, it's like 10 times more efficiently, you will see that in how quickly the blocks get confirmed. And Bitcoin will automatically at the protocol level just change that every 2 weeks, 2016 blocks. It'll adjust that to make it more fair to try to get close to that 10-minute window. And right now it's dropping, so it makes more inefficient miners now possibly profitable or less losing money. And every time so I meet with the Bitcoin Phoenix group. They call themselves Arizona Bitcoiners, but it's the Phoenix metro area, and they meet in Tempe a lot. They have quite a few individuals that go to that meetup that are in the Bitcoin mining space. There's some that host their own. They have their own miners, and they do their own mining, but they also do hosted services. So they'll have locations in like Idaho or Texas, and you can rent space, either rent rigs there and you just pay them for the use of the rig and electricity, or you can, I think some setups you can have where you can send your own miner there and they'll host it. It's like you're renting the space just for electricity and you're in part of their infrastructure. There's a whole bunch of different things, but they had a panel. I want to say it was 2023, might have been 2024. I'm trying to remember back now. And they had a panel of 4 guys up there talking about Bitcoin mining, and it helped solidify my own opinion where Bitcoin mining at home is not profitable. Every time, for different reasons, when I think about it and I start doing the math, I start doing the numbers, I start thinking, well, okay, what if I do X, Y, and Z? It just never works out. It always seems to be a better bet for somebody like me in my position just to buy the Bitcoin. So that those panels really solidified for me that the only way that it would be really close to making a profit as a home individual is if you're in a cold climate and you have the ability to harness that heat that comes from Bitcoin mining, cooling the computers and the chips. If you can use that heat to offset other costs, say you don't need to turn your heater on as much, or you have a hot water system set up so you don't have to use as much electricity warming the water because the Bitcoin miner heats it, or all these other things. Like if you watched our interview that Jeff and I had with Duncan, he's the owner of this solo mining company in the UK. He goes by IMGPIO. We talk a little bit about mining. He has a whole bunch of different things that he talks about and sells and things that he's designing. He has this coffee mug warmer where you can keep your coffee warm, and a foot warmer. You just put your feet on it and the heat from it kind of, you don't need to plug that in for the heat specifically. It mines Bitcoin and you use it as a foot warmer. Those kind of things are where it starts getting beneficial. One thing in the United States that's not really working very well is cold climates generally have more expensive electricity. So you really need to have some kind of setup on a commercial environment usually, or some kind of contract to get cheaper electricity to make it happen. But there are ways to do it. And the ways always seem to benefit those more if you're in a colder climate and you have the access to cheap power. If you have questions about that, hit us up. Let us know. I'm just digging into a lot of this. I'm going to get a couple more miners. I can't show you right now with my current setup on my home system here, but I have a bookshelf that I have set up now just strictly for Bitcoin mining, and I have the miner that Duncan sent us. It's the Bitforge Nano Ghost Edition. I'm going to get 2 more up there, and I'll show those on a different episode. But I'm starting to dig into that. I'm running out to my fuse box to see which circuits are on like a 15 amp versus 20 amp, because in America it matters when you're on a 120 volt system. And I know I'm probably boring 99% of you with those details, but I've never actually dug into that and how that works. But I'm doing that now. So I'm finding out, I can't put it in this room if I get a real miner. I got to put it in that room, like where the washer and dryer is, because that's a 30 amp outlet. And it's really fun stuff that I love digging into. The last thing I want to mention before we go is Bitcoin Prague just wrapped up. And it's interesting, in this bear market, we've seen excitement for some of these conferences. And by estimates online, I think Bitcoin Prague this year had record attendance of somewhere between 8,500 to 10,000 attendees. Massive expo. And, keynote speakers for like Jack Mallers and Michael Saylor. And it's just interesting to see in a bear market. But let's be honest, these conferences are just great to meet people. And you meet people on the other part of the world in a new environment. And I love traveling in general. So I'm excited. I've only watched a couple talks from there. I'll be catching up this next week and watching some more. It's interesting. Crypto Twitter, I think that's what we still call it, Bitcoin X or whatever. There's always these made up arguments. And it's interesting, one of the most recent ones, other than Jack Maller's shoes, which apparently is mesmerizing certain people, and I'm not into fashion, so I don't care. Jack had asked Michael Saylor a question. I think it was officially the day before, so it was like the Bitcoin for Corporations Pro Pass type day or whatever you want to call it. And he asked them basically to define MNAV. And people are taking that as, oh my gosh, Jack, you don't know what MNAV is. You're a CEO of a public company. I need to sell my shares. Like, are you kidding me? And it's funny, they're branding this as like an argument where, they're challenging each other publicly instead of in private on what MNAV means. And it seems like everybody, at least the ones arguing about it, except for the people involved, Jack, Matt Cole, Michael Saylor, none of them, they're like, these are good questions. These are things that should be openly talked about and debated. And in fact, there's some people on X that are, like Fred Krueger, who's always like enragement farming, trying to get more followers. It's like his number one stat in life. He's now attacking other Bitcoiners like Matthew Cratter, who's like, Matthew Cratter has an insane following on YouTube. I think it's 10x more than Fred. So he's obviously trying to draw from that crowd and get more followers. But he challenges him. He's like, I think Matthew Cratter's wrong. He's saying MNAV's X, Y, and Z when really it's 1, 2, 3 and the power line or whatever. And it's interesting. It's a great debate. It's important to talk about, but it seems to be one of the most popularized things because it's emotions, it's energy, it's conflict when there really is none. But that came from BTC Prague, and BTC Prague seems to be like one of the stalwarts, one of the big conferences to consider if you're thinking about traveling, especially for those of us in the U.S. If you're thinking about hitting up a conference outside of the U.S., that seems to be, at least for me, one of the high ones on my list. So Jeff will be back next week. I'm sure we'll see if we can get the scheduling worked out, and we have a couple interviews planned and in the pipes. There's some scheduling things that are always kind of making it fluid. But if you're interested in being on our podcast, I'll be honest with you. If you know me and we talk about Bitcoin more than once, whether it's just on X or in person, you probably have an interesting story and you just don't realize it. So don't think that you don't have something interesting that viewers would get value from. That's one thing I've noticed over specifically the last 9 months or so is there is a lot of value from people in the Bitcoin space that don't see it themselves because they're in it. So reach out, let us know. We'll get you scheduled on here and we'll have a good time. We got a couple of big ones coming up that are going to take a little preparation for, but watch that. Check out our X page, follow us on there. We'll have some more links on there. I didn't post anything from last week just because of some of the scheduling conflicts, but yeah, follow us there. Follow Jeff's page, my page. Check out the link that we have below. If you have a miner, if you have a home miner like a BitAxe or any of these other devices, come join us Saturday for the pool party, and we'll try to mine a block together, right? So if you don't have any Bitcoin, just get off of zero. But if you do have Bitcoin, keep stacking sats. See you guys again next week. Take care.